The past few weeks I've done 14 Exarch runs, and in this video I'm gonna review them all. Alright, I'm gonna start off with Ignite Penance Brand, Elementalist. So Penance Brand got buffed in 3.28, it has 10% more damage, high effectiveness of air damage, and no longer has 30% less damage with ailments. So in my opinion, this version with Elementalist has pretty good clear. The radius of the Penance Brand explosion is pretty high, and you also get Ignite Prolife to help a lot with improving your clear. So the downside of Penance Brand Ignite is that you don't really scale cast speed on Ignite builds, which means your delay will be the delay of Penance Brand reaching 20 energy stacks is somewhat higher. And this delayed damage on top of Ignite damage already being delayed damage means that you will have to build quite a bit of avoidance because the monsters get to fight back. Ignite Penance Brand is one of the better clearing skills I've played in these runs, and it's, in my opinion, pretty strong. In the campaign, I wouldn't, if I did the run again, I wouldn't really switch to Penance Brand at 31, because I think at that point Armageddon Brand and Cremation is better, or Firestorm, and it's better to stick to those fire skills because of the delay. Alright, next up, Holy Sweep. Holy Sweep is a skill that was added in 3.28. You kind of swirl your staff around, and when enemies get hit by your staff, you also call down these like small hammers, and you can also get over AoE overlaps with these hammers. So it's basically a double hit. You hit the enemy once with Sweep, and then also you hit them with a Holy Hammer. So I built quite a bit of block. I played Guardian, so pretty high block. The clear was, I would say, okay. It wasn't particularly amazing. The single target damage was rather mediocre, and there's definitely some overlap going on with the Holy Hammer. So if the boss monsters spawn monsters next to him or her, you're gonna get quite a few extra hits. And I also use Static Strike to assist with single target damage, but overall I'd say this build of all my Exarch runs was rather mid, maybe even a little bit below average, but it was still a fun skill to try out. Alright, next up is Smite Slayer. Smite Slayer was a rather fast run, and it's probably one of the fastest runs that I've done. It has pretty good clear. You get a lot of AoE, especially through the Slayer Sensei. You have fast attacks with you have increased attack speed on your foils, which already have pretty high base attack speed. And you also get the dual wield bonus, 10% more attack speed. And you also get block if you go for the sword block nodes and the dual wield nodes. So with Smite, you will have to position correctly to get double hits. And my experience, the more strike range you have, the more difficult it is to actually double hit. It's definitely more difficult to double hit than it is with Lightning Strike. Something to keep in mind. I had pretty fast movement with my Leap Slam because of all the attack speed. Overall, I say it's a pretty strong character. It used to be considered meta, but the play rate has dropped for some reason. Definitely a decent league starter in my opinion. Alright, next up, Spark. So with Spark, the problem is you only have okay damage in campaign once you have projectile speed and skill factoration, and those nodes are somewhat far away, especially the projectile speed nodes are pretty far away from the Templar area. So what I did is I switched to Spark pretty late, and even then it didn't feel very good. I did not get any avoidance on this, well, not any avoidance. I got very little block because you really have to invest into damage. Otherwise, the Spark Exarch run would have taken too long. So I had to get RF for the around 35% more spell damage. And even with that, with the Smite and the RF, it was rather low damage compared to the other runs that I've done. And it's pretty strong it's pretty decent in narrow layouts where you get to have like lots of multiple hits with Spark. But in narrow layouts, you also get hit more easily, which is not good if you don't have enough damage and avoidance, which was the case in my run. Also, Spark has really bad DPS in open layouts, which becomes quite noticeable in the Exarch fight, where you constantly have to, well, I constantly had to lure him into the corner to get extra hits with each cast. So I can't really recommend this skill as a strong starter. It's definitely not a strong starter, but if you really like the skill, it's still probably fine to start, just wouldn't expect much from it. All right, next up, Static Strike. Static Strike was buffed in 3.28. I think it got more damage and higher beam frequency. Static Strike has really good clear. I played it with Shockwave, so I didn't scale a lot of attack speed. So with Static Strike, you only have to attack every 4 seconds, and then for 4 seconds you send out a beam, and the beam can also trigger shockwaves, which I used Shockwave support. And with that, it had pretty good clear speed. I like this build quite a lot. Very, very good clear speed. The single target damage is okay. I used also Generous Cry Holy Hammers to assist with single target damage. And so downside with Static Strike Shockwave is you don't scale much attack speed, as attack speed doesn't change the beam frequency, and Shockwave needs cooldown recovery to occur more often. So you don't scale attack speed, which makes it feel a little bit clunky. Since your attacks are so slow, monsters can fight back, and your leaf slam isn't also that fast. And you can build block. Overall, I would say pretty strong. I don't know how it scales into late game, but it felt pretty strong in this Exarch run and had really good clear in my opinion. Right, next up, Absolution. So in this one, I was a little bit unlucky with map drops, and I also didn't get Val Absolution after corrupting Absolution like 7 times roughly. So this is a skill that got buffed in 3.28 as well. I think it got a AoE buff, and in the next patch, it will also have lower cast time, base cast time. So the clear speed, in my opinion, wasn't particularly great. And you can also kind of see it in the footage. The damage is not amazing. So I went Scepters, so I can cast Smite. Scepters with Smite is a little bit more damage than Convoking Wands early on, because Smite gives so much flat lightning damage, but doing it this way requires a more active playstyle. And so in my experience, so the single target damage was okay, but in my experience, this is a bit worse than Summon Raging Spirits, and it's still like a decent for a minion build. It's pretty decent. I just wouldn't rank it a very good skill compared to, you know, like all the meta skills that are out there, like slams and stuff. So if you're a minion player and you're looking for a minion build, this is one of the better minion builds. But if you want like a very strong league start, I do not recommend the skill. All right, next up is Stormbrand. So Stormbrand also got buffed last patch, high effectiveness of air damage. So it has pretty good single target damage. It's probably in the top 5 of the runs that I had done in terms of fastest executor kills, but it kind of struggles with clear, since Stormbrand only sends beams to 3 targets. So the clear is really not that great. I had a pretty good campaign time. So I think it was 3 hours 35 minutes. My average is roughly 3 hours 50 minutes. It was pretty easy to play. You can start it at level 12. What I would recommend at level 12 is that you still use another spell to cast in addition to Stormbrand, because Stormbrand has a pretty long duration if you don't use Swiftbrand. So you can cast additional skill in addition to Stormbrand, and you can also use Smite to gain a flat lightning damage buff. So Stormbrand is pretty easy to play. You don't have to aim with your brands, and the brands will look for new targets. And you can also invest into brand attachment range, so that the Stormbrand can find a target further away. It's a very inactive playstyle, especially if you don't use Swiftbrand on bosses. It's also a little bit boring of a skill because you don't really have to do much against bosses. I built it quite squishy with no avoidance, so something to keep in mind from the footage. And even with going mostly damage, the clear wasn't great, but single target damage was pretty good. I would say it's a pretty good skill in campaign. Not so much for big pack size maps. You will probably need some kind of explosions. Next up, hit Penance Brand. So as previously mentioned, Penance Brand got buffed, 10% more damage, high effectiveness of added damage in 3.28. So it has a delay. You need to reach 20 energy stacks, and only then will Penance Brand explode. This delay can be changed with cast speed and Swiftbrand. Compared to Ignite Penance Brand, you do invest into cast speed quite a bit, so that the delay is much shorter than you would but then it would be the case with Ignite Penance Brand. But also, as previously mentioned, the delay makes Penance Brand feel a little bit clunky. It's not so much of a problem with the hit-based version, and it probably will be less of a problem in the end game where you have a lot more cast speed invested into it. And I think Penance Brand has really high damage. The AoE was okay. You have quite a bit of AoE nodes in the Witch and Templar area, and also between the Witch and Shadow area. So compared to Storm Brand, it had better clear in my opinion. The explosions, a big explosion is a lot better than a brand that sends out 3 beams to 3 targets. Sends out beams to 3 targets. It has comparable single target damage with Storm Brand, but requires a more active playstyle. So in this particular run, I was unlucky as I got no 5-link, and I only had enough regen for RF towards the very, very end of the run. And RF would have given me about 35% more spell damage, so that's something to keep in mind. And if I had enough regen early on and I had like a 5-link, this would have probably been one of my fastest runs. So I would say it was a pretty fun caster build in my opinion. I can definitely recommend this based on the Exarch experience that I've had with this build, with the skill. Alright, next up, Poison Spectral. So with Poison Spectral, I want to see if it's a good alternative to Pekong leveling. It's definitely more difficult to play than Pekong as it requires good positioning. If you want to get multiple hits per attack, Spectral has an attack timer. If you position the enemy at roughly 80% of the maximum distance of the Spectral Throw, you get about 4 hits per attack. And so Spectral Throw is pretty bad against mobile targets, because if the target moves out of range, the returning projectiles won't hit. So that's pretty bad. And if the enemy is too close to you, you also won't get 4 hits. And this becomes quite noticeable in the Exarch fight. Exarch lost to dash around a lot if you're not in melee range with him. So pretty big problem there. So it has pretty decent clear with GMP. GMP has no damage penalty on the poison. So it just gives you additional projectiles on Spectral Throw. So the skill has pretty good coverage, but I would say worse single target in clear damage than just overall worse damage than bouncing Poisonous Concoction. And something to note with this run is that I had a Wasp Nest towards the end of the campaign. So Wasp Nest is a pretty common unique and should be probably 1 Chaos Orb on League start, but it's a pretty decent claw for at League start. So overall, I would say this build is worse than Pekong, but not by a lot, but it's definitely more difficult to play. Alright, next up, regular Viper Strike, not Mamba Viper Strike. So technically it was the fastest one that I've done, but there are other skills that I've done runs with that could have been faster than this, but because Viper Strike was one of my latest runs, I just know the game a little bit better now. That's why it's a little bit faster. And Viper Strike is a pro melee skill. You actually have to stand next to the enemy for hits to connect. So that comes with disadvantages. It's also poison melee skill, so it's delayed damage, and you need to stand next to the enemy, which means you will need high avoidance or, for example, block evasion if you don't want to get shredded by monsters. So overall, it has pretty decent clear speed, pretty good single target damage, and it was also my gauntlet build, which I got rank 1 Rager with. So obviously, it's a fairly good progression build. I would not, if you want to play efficiently, I would not recommend playing it so early on. It's really, really bad. I would say also Ranger doesn't get any melee nodes for Viper Strike. So I wouldn't play this early on. I would play Pekong till 38 when you get multi-strike. And then you could switch to Viper Strike. Probably even better to just stay Pekong through the entire campaign so you don't have to constantly craft swords. Alright, next up, Shockwave Cyclone. So Something to note in this particular footage and this particular run is that this was a failed 4-stone run, so I only uploaded the 2-stone part. If I focused on rushing to Exarch either, it probably would have been one of my fastest runs. This build is very easy to play. You're attacking while you're moving. You have pretty okay defense, as you can build max res pretty easily. You can get endurance charges pretty easily and block. It has pretty good clear speed with Shockwave blocking, and overall I say it's pretty solid build that I've already tested a couple times. In 3.28 it got the exceptional gem Void Shockwave, so scaling should be better. So overall pretty good. I would say a decent league starter, not meta but pretty decent. Alright, next up, Winter Orb. So Winter Orb is getting some huge buffs next patch. Additional projectile, higher crit chance, higher effectiveness of added damage, additional projectiles, and 25 chance to freeze. This skill is pretty easy to play, as you don't have to aim and you don't have to react to enemies yourself. Winter Orb will just target enemies for you. And there's also one problem with that, is you can't select the target that Winter Orb will attack, which can be a problem early on if the monsters, for example, spam ads. For example, the siege boss there's a phase where he becomes invulnerable and summons his totems that you have to destroy first. But Winter Orb is kind of stupid, and it will also target the siege boss while he's invulnerable. So that's one example. The clear, I would say, is not particularly great if you don't have any explosions. But even before the buffs, I would say the single target damage is actually really good, in my opinion. And one downside is also you have to stand still to have more projectile frequency. So early on, I would say it could be clunky to play. So in my opinion, it felt a little bit weak early on at the campaign before you get your additional projectiles. It's probably going to be less of a problem next patch when you get additional projectiles built into the gem. Also, it was a little bit squishy early on, but freeze helped with alleviating the lack of avoidance on my character. Alright, next up, Physical Dot. So Physical Dot Scion. All Phys Dot skills will be buffed in 3.29. They're gonna receive about 20% more damage, and on top of that, some skills will also get higher base duration. For example, Var Reap and Corrupting Fever. So I started Phys Dot at 18, which is possible with Scion because you have some early physical damage nodes. And it was surprisingly pretty decent in campaign. Exsanguinate has one. So basically, Exsanguinate shoots out up to 9 tendrils, and you can support Exsanguinate with Chain, and those tendrils then can also chain. Even though they're not projectiles, they can still chain. And so one downside is you will need to press your life loss every now and then early on, since Exsanguinate has a life cost instead of a mana cost. So before you have physical spell leech, it can be a little bit clunky to play. So on Phys Dot Scion, you can build block with the Necromancer mode. So another downside with Phys Dot is that the base cast time for these Phys Dot skills is actually quite high, but you're a dot skill, so you don't really scale cast speed. To alleviate that problem, you could use Flesh Offering instead of Bone Offering early on, which is what I did, and it felt okay to play for me. Alright, next up is the Cold Dot. So all Cold Dot skills are getting buffed next patch, and we are also getting a cold damage keystone. I had very bad map RNG in this run. This run probably would have been my fastest run if I had average map RNG. Also, I didn't have 5-link, but that's not that important for a Cold Dot in an Exarch run. So you clear in with Cold Dot, or with this version of Cold Dot where you use Creeping Frost, Vortex, and Cold Snap. You mostly just clear with Cold Snap. So Cold Snap has a cooldown, but the cooldown can be bypassed if you spend a Frenzy Charge, and you gain Frenzy Charges through Cold Snap if an enemy dies. So there's a chance to get a Frenzy Charge if an enemy dies in the Cold Dot area of Cold Snap. And while Cold Snap is also getting buffed next patch, it's gonna have 2 uses instead of 1. So Cold Dot did really well once you have all your cold skills. I thought it was a pretty smooth campaign, and in my opinion, it was also pretty easy to play. but some people might not share that opinion because it's a multi-button playstyle. You need to use Creeping Frost. Well, you don't need to use it, but you can use Creeping Frost and Vortex. But you only use Creeping Frost against bosses. And Vortex I also didn't use that much while clearing. You don't really have to aim with Cold Dot that much with Cold Snap. Since it has a lot of AoE with Elementalist, and you can get a lot of increased AoE nodes. You get your Golem, you get your Convergence, which gives you AoE. So it's a pretty big area when you cast it, and it also expands a little bit after you've cast it. So some people might not like the multi-button playstyle. Then you can go for Wintertide Brand. Wintertide Brand only uses Wintertide Brand and Cold Snap for clearing, and you could also use Cold Snap. Alright, and that was the review of all the runs that I've done in this patch. Alright, thank you for watching.